Chapter 2. First Addendum to Theory section. The four basic complementary postulates. Be known. This is the creative postulate, the postulate that brings the effect into existence. His pan-determined postulate that goes with it at the other end of the communication line is no. This twin postulate structure is still present even if the effect is only being created for the benefit of the creator. In this case he merely responds to his one pan-determined postulate and knows his own creation. Time is the postulate, continue to be known, and is the postulate that introduces persistence into the creation. In games play there are many methods of ensuring persistence, so that others are not easily able to vanish a creation. The most basic method is the lie, which calls the creation something which it is not. Thus, the perceiver only views the lie, and is unable to vanish the original postulate, which remains hidden. Therefore, this late in the game very few things are what they appear to be, and illusions are rampant. There are no screens associated with this postulate, but there are plenty of them to be encountered from the opposition postulate. Mustn't know, see later in this section. Be not known. This is the vanishing postulate, the postulate that takes the effect out of existence, his matching pan-determined postulate at the other end of the communication line is not know. However, due to the various persistency mechanisms, it's not easy these days to make a piece of the universe vanish for everyone. Consequently, the vanishing postulate has long since become the hiding postulate. The being, no longer able to make the effect vanish, has to be content with hiding it. There are many ways of doing this, the most common being to veil it with screens. The most impervious screens are black ones, and you will always find a lot of gooey blackness associated with this postulate. In point of fact, the lie mechanism which is used by be known in games played to ensure the persistency of a creation by calling it something different from what it is really an attempt to mask the truth and is a part of be not known, but I included it in the earlier section for convenience. Be not known also uses the lie mechanism by further masking the truth so that the knower will not recognize the effect even when he finds it. It's all very devious, and little wonder that people take up religion, and pray that the Almighty can maybe sort out the mess for them. No. This is the postulate that permits the being to know the effect. His matching pan-determined postulate at the other end of the communication line is be known, so the effect is there for him to know. There are no screens or blackness associated with knowing, but as this postulate in games play is opposed by be not known, you can expect to be feeling your way through a fair bit of murk from time to time in your pursuit of this postulate. Just work your way through it and understand what is going on, that's all. Not know. This is the no-perceive postulate. It is the postulate the being uses to permit him to be unaware of an effect. His matching pan-determined postulate at the other end of the communication line is be not known. It's necessary to clearly differentiate this postulate from be not known. Be not known is a vanishing, or hiding postulate. Not know is merely a desire not to perceive the effect. An example of the use of the postulate is a spiritual being looking through a wall. He chooses to not know the wall so he can perceive what is on the other side. However, due to the persistency postulates of the universe, that not know postulate degenerates into an attempt to vanish the unwanted effect by force, then, failing that, to hide the effect from oneself behind a screen, usually of blackness. These screens are of an entirely different texture to the screens associated with the be not known postulate, being much harder and almost brittle. They are impact-resistant screens, designed for use against the most enthusiastic, must be known as, he encounters in games play. When you strike these screens, you will feel as though you are dealing with black basalt. Sometimes, however, the screens of mustn't know are quite transparent, and of the consistency of super-hardened quartz. Or the screens associated with mustn't know are hard, and clearly designed to resist any conceivable effect. People heavily dramatizing this postulate tend to develop a brittle hardness to their personality too. These people almost literally crack under intolerable stress. The pan-determined postulates. These are the hidden postulates in life, not because any attempt is being made to hide them, but merely because man the materialist cannot fit them into his theories about life, and so tends to discount their existence. Everyone knows about self-determined postulates, but few suspect the existence of their pan-determined twins at the other end of the communication line. Thus, being unknown or generally ignored, they tend to be highly effective. For example, how many people can resist a stray cat who wanders in and looks at you with his big, pleading eyes? You don't know it, but that sudden urge to get him a saucer of milk and a nice warm home is more his pan-determined postulate than your self-determined one. Animals, being entirely natural, and not being educated to the contrary, use their pan-determined postulates to the full, thus making willing slaves out of the so much more intelligent and rational humans. Babies, too, are masters of the pan-determined postulate. They have yet to be educated out of their belief in the efficacy of such things. A large part of your work will be exercises in developing your pan-determined postulates, and becoming aware of the pan-determined postulates of others, for in our civilization, it has become an almost totally neglected aspect of life. What is called a magnetic personality is entirely the conscious or unconscious use of pan-determined postulates. The subject of pan-determined postulates is the whole subject of action at a distance. Learn to use them, for they are an integral part of the abilities at your disposal. Man the materialist is endlessly mystified and intrigued by psionic abilities, where beings know or create effects across a distance, or through time. These are usually, in this day and age, manifestations of pan-determined postulates that are as much a surprise to their originators as they are to those learned scientists who examine them. Most of the manifestations are pretty elementary, and are not to be compared with what can happen when the being gets the mechanism under his conscious control. Identity. This is the role a being assumes in order to play a game. Like any other effect, it is a created thing, and obeys the laws that govern effects in general. Thus identity, as soon as it is considered important, tends to persist, become more solid, and have command power over the being. Intelligence. This is the ability to evaluate relative importances, that is, the ability to note differences and similarities between them. Thus, a person can be very knowledgeable, but if he is unable to evaluate the things he knows, he will be incredibly stupid. Children give the apparency of being stupid, but this is not so. The child merely lacks data and experience, and so has nothing against which to evaluate what he perceives. This is also why children are so gullible, and will believe anything you tell them. Generally speaking, within the data at their disposal, children are much more intelligent than grown-ups. Stupidity is the inability to evaluate data. Ignorance is the lack of data to evaluate. Death. This is the loss of a body. At this time it is considered a deprivation of magnitude, and temporarily throws the being into a feeling of degradation sufficient to occlude his knowledge of the lifetime he has just lived. It forces him into a must know regarding it. See the chart. Without a body he regards himself as a nobody, literally a nobody. Thus, in his subsequent life he has few if any recalls of ever having lived before. This is all that is involved. As the being comes up the line, his recalls of his past lives will progressively return to him. Can't. Can't is the feeling one gets when his postulates are overwhelmed. The anatomy of can't is must versus must not. You cannot work with can't. It runs apathy, 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 and then, just for a change, more apathy. You work with must and mustn't in opposition, see chart, and then you succeed. Emotions. These are particles a being creates to let other people know how the game is going. There is a scale of emotions from apathy up to serenity. They are very light particles, and as soon as you touch them in recall they change to other emotions further up the scale. Sensations. These are particles which occur at the boundary between opposing postulates. Like emotions, there is a scale of sensations. As the space opens up, the sensations change to ones further up the scale. Pain is a sensation in very collapsed space. Further up scale is sexual sensation. Then tickles. Above this is heat. Then electrical sensations. Then color, and finally pure aesthetics at the top of the scale. The ones listed here are only some of the well-known landmarks on the scale. There is a near infinity of gradations between all of them. Thus emotions and sensations are very elusive things when you contact them in recall. As soon as you touch them they vanish and become something else further upscale. The long night of the soul. Things are what they are. Things are where they are. You find out everything there is to know about them by examining them where they are. If you wish to find out about a wall, you examine that wall. Everything about that wall is to be found right where that wall is. You don't have to go and talk to the builder who built it. That is an excellent way to find out about the builder, but a very poor way to find out about the wall he built. Talking to the builder in order to find out about the wall he built is known as the search for prior cause. Mankind fondly believes that the only way to find out about the mind is to select some effect it contains, then look further into the mind to find the cause of that effect. Then, having found what appears to be the cause, to consider it an effect, and to start searching for the cause of this effect, even deeper in the mind, etc. Thus, one backtracks in search of prime cause, a cause which is not an effect of an earlier cause. Having found this prime cause, the whole mind will vanish in a puff of green smoke, or something, or so the theory goes. Now there is some justification for this theory, when you are dealing with material objects. One billiard ball cannons into another on a table, and imparts a motion to it. The motion of the second ball is indeed caused by its impact with the first ball. But what imparted motion to the first ball? Why, the billiard player, of course. The being who is playing the game of billiards. Once you take him out of the equation, you will search, endlessly, for your prime cause. The search for the prime cause of the mind then, without considering the living being who created, and is maintaining that mind, is a futile search, for one is not looking for prime cause in a place where it is possible to find it. The first requisite for finding anything, is to search for it in a place where it is possible for it to be. Everything you discover in the mind, indeed, its total content, is an effect. There are no causes in there, so you won't find any. Thus, to postulate that one part of the mind is the cause of some other part is a lie, and in pursuit of this lie you will never discover the truth. The endless ransacking of the mind in search of prime cause is called the long night of the soul. It's a very long night, it goes on forever. After the elapse of a theoretical infinity of time, you would emerge from the same door as you went in, much, much sadder, and no wiser. Everything you wish to know about any effect in your mind lies in that particular effect, and your relationship to it right now. To skid off sideways and reach deeper into your mind for the cause of this effect is to commit yourself to the long night of the soul. Don't embark upon it, for it may well be the last anyone ever sees of you. The hidden influence, the self-fulfilling prophecy. In searching for the cause of his difficulties, mankind has, over the centuries, pointed his finger at almost everything. It's doubtful if anything has ever truly escaped his baleful glare. The sun, the moon and the stars were early contenders. Later came demons, and things that go bump in the night. Very early on, man discovered that there's not much future in assigning the cause of his troubles to something that can be easily perceived, for the simple reason that it's too darned easy to refute the hypothesis. The field rapidly narrowed down to those things not easily perceived, the hidden. Thus, the hidden influence was born. To be really convincing, of course, a hidden influence should not only be hidden, but be by its very nature utterly impossible to perceive. In that way, the hypothesis that this thing is the cause of mankind's difficulties could never be refuted. No one could ever come along and inconveniently announce that he'd perceived this thing, and found it to be entirely innocuous. The progress of science, endlessly bringing more and more from the unknown into the realm of the known, has also tended to drive the hidden influence more and more from the unknown into the unknowable. Indeed, science itself has become a prime source of the unknowable in its own right. For example, science today claims that the basis of all personality, and therefore, presumably all difficulties, is to be found in submicroscopic particles within the genes of the body, with the strong implication that even with a few $1 billion worth of research grants, it is very doubtful if we'll ever be able to truly perceive these things at all. Even if these submicroscopic particles are one day perceived, and discovered to be harmless after all, a new hidden influence will promptly be dreamed up to take their place. And so the game will continue. While the things postulated as hidden influences are either imaginary or truly harmless, the game does little more than make people miserable. But when these things actually do exist, then it's an entirely different story. For example, everyone has been born, but few can recall the event in detail. So there is a whole class of possible hidden influences to be found in the events everyone knows to have happened, but few can recall ever having happened to themselves. This class also has the advantage of no one being able to claim it is imaginary, and so refute the hypothesis out of hand. In other words, the concept is capable of convincing people of its truth, a prime necessity in the field of hidden influences. As this class of possible hidden influences is near infinite, it is very fertile soil for anyone who has, for whatever reason, an urge to create a convincing hidden influence. A number of possibilities in this direction have already, if inadvertently, been explored. Amongst them are sex, pain, guilt, survival, unconsciousness. Others are being continuously added to the list, as you will find, if you keep up to date with your psychological journals. please understand that I am not suggesting that the originators of these theories were merely out to make a fast buck, though many fast bucks are there to be made by the unscrupulous, who understand this mechanism, for many were dedicated researchers, and truly believed that their research had found the answer to at least some of mankind's difficulties. No, my whole purpose is merely to point out that the mechanism is not without its dangers. Let us take being born for example. Now, to the best of my knowledge, no researcher has ever seriously claimed that being born was the prime cause of man's difficulties, though I would not be surprised if sooner or later one of them did. For it does fulfill all the requirements of a good, convincing hidden influence. Namely, A. It has happened to everybody. B. It is not easily recalled. C. It does contain a certain amount of upset in its own right, quite apart from what is said about it afterwards. So you go up to a person and say, the origin of your difficulties, Mr. Jones, are to be found in your birth trauma. This, as the very first thing that ever happened to you, must be the basis for all your later difficulties. He will immediately see that what you say could just have a germ of truth in it. You then go on to add, once we lift your birth trauma, then the basis of all your psychological difficulties will be known to you, and all will promptly vanish. It all sounds very plausible, does it not? But what happens when the person is convinced that you are right? His birth trauma is now, in his own estimation, elevated from whatever it originally was, into a thing of vast importance. It will immediately become much more solid and persistent. It is entirely possible that any pains he experienced in his birth trauma will immediately impinge upon his body, and he will also experience the emotions, right then and there, that he experienced in birth. This, of course, is taken as proof of the fact that the birth trauma was the basis of his difficulties. The prophecy becomes, in fact, self-fulfilling. Now, do you see the danger? Whatever the effect, assuming it to be real and not entirely imaginary, which is considered as the prime cause of the difficulties, immediately becomes intensified in importance, and therefore in solidity and persistence, by the mere act of considering it in such a manner. Man, you just try to get rid of it now. This is a very real danger, not only to the patient but to the researcher himself. He himself might not have been totally convinced by his hypothesis, but here is a person in front of his very eyes who is proving him right. So here is the danger. Whatever effect in the mind you choose as being causative over the being's behavior, immediately intensifies in solidity, persistence and command power, and will tend to prove your hypothesis. But, you might say, what about this therapy you are advocating? Surely it? No. I never said it. All I'm saying is that that which is considered important tends to become more solid and persistent, and to have a command power over the being. I have never specified the importance. Reread the theory if you don't believe me. At no place in it am I pointing the finger and saying, that is the basic importance. At no time am I postulating a specific hidden influence. Oh yes, there are many things in your mind, which are currently hidden from you, which influence your behavior. But only you know what they are. And, what is more, only you are entirely capable of becoming aware of these things, and so vanishing the influence. You are, in fact, the greatest authority on your own mind. You created it, and now maintain it with the same loving care that mothers reserve for their offspring. There are no hidden influences that you are incapable of becoming aware of. If it is influencing you, it is entirely possible for you to become aware of it, and so remove the influence. The concept of the hidden influence that, by its very nature, you are incapable of being aware of, is something dreamed up by people who do not have your best interests at heart. They wish to scare you, and so make you more easy to control. The game of the hidden influence is a very insidious one, but a game it is. Its total purpose is to introvert your attention in search of the undiscoverable, and so make you that much easier to overwhelm. It is a law of life that a being is capable of sensing anything that can influence that being. Otherwise it could not influence him. There are no forces of darkness that you cannot sense. No things that go bump in the night that you cannot discover the nature of, if you care to go and take a look. There are no absolute importances either. There is no class of importances in the mind that you can point a finger at and say, that is the cause of all the trouble, without immediately escalating the importance of this thing, so granting command power over you that could well stick you with it forever. All importances are relative to all other importances. All are entirely a matter of conviction, and all can be evaluated one against the other. As you do so, your mind, as an entity, will progressively vanish, and your full native abilities will be restored to you. The game of the hidden influence is basically the game of must know versus mustn't be known. The service effect. Every being tends to utilize whatever he has at his disposal in the playing of games. This applies to any effect. For example, he may find himself stuck with must know a chronic pain in the back. He may use this pain in the back to dominate his family, must be known. He may use it as an excuse for a trip around the world so he can see the sights, must know. He may use it as the reason he needs solitude, mustn't be known. He may use it to achieve all three postulates. Or he may not use it at all. It depends upon the being and the games he is playing. Always be prepared then to consider an effect as a service effect, something which the being presses into service in life to aid him in the playing of games. What starts out as a must be known is used by another who gets stuck with it, must know, as something to hide in and resist the world with, and so on. The permutations on the theme are nearly infinite. Do you have to do anything about this phenomena on the route out? No. One only has to become aware of it. That is sufficient. In truth, the being is hampered by this effect. He is always more capable without the dependency upon it. But only when he spots this will he relinquish the effect. So you won't find any exercises in the practical section designed to handle this phenomena, for it is an integral part of all games play. We all do it. We always have done it. And will continue to do it as long as we consider the effect to be more valuable than its absence. Indeed, one could consider the whole mind to be a vast service effect, and in many ways it is exactly that. The body. There is a vast and as yet largely unexplored application of this technology to the body itself. Each part of the body has a specialized function, and is therefore in a specialized games condition. What we call aging, leading finally to the death of the body, is each body part suffering a surfeit of overwhelm in its specialized game during life, until it can no longer function properly in its own consideration. Eventually body death occurs when one or other of the vital organs quits entirely. However, the being himself, once he isolates the specialized function, that is, game, of a body part can, by his own creativity, return that body part to optimum functioning once more, by removing the accumulated overwhelms. Thus, It is theoretically possible for a being to make his own body immortal. There is nothing life cannot do once it knows how to do it. Ethics. It's relevant to ask at this stage, should a being's native abilities be restored to him? Would he not, immediately, alone or in association with others so freed, hold the rest of mankind in slavery for his own ends? The answer to this question lies in the difference between a being in a compulsive games condition and a being who plays games by choice. Mankind today is in a compulsive games condition. By this, I mean he has lost his power of choice in the matter. He must play games, he must win these games, and he must do these things regardless of all else. You see this frenetic activity around you every day. It's all become so deadly, deadly serious, a matter of life and death. Why, even enjoying yourself has become a serious matter. Only the children can still laugh in sheer, uninhibited pleasure, but only until they receive their education and realize how serious it all really is. As the game becomes more serious, more important, the player's concern for the well-being of his adversary becomes less and less. What are 1,000,000 Jews slaughtered in the gas chamber when it's for the glory of the Third Reich? They're only Jews, aren't they? What matter that the jackboots are steeped in blood and gore as long as the war is won? They're only the enemy, aren't they? What matter that a man be compelled to work long hours, under atrocious conditions, for miserly pay, so his employer can make more profit? He's only a worker, isn't he? What matter that workers band together and form unions, then dissipate the wealth of a nation in interminable strikes to improve their lot? They're only money-grabbing capitalists, aren't they? The compulsive games condition. The more compulsive it becomes, the more partisan the being becomes. The more partisan the being becomes, the less real his opponent becomes to him, and so the more easy it becomes to justify his inexcusable behavior towards him. Yes, it would be folly indeed to give such a being true power, for abuse it he most certainly would, at the first opportunity. But while the being is in a compulsive games condition, he has no true power. It's only as the compulsion fades that the true power begins to emerge. It's only when he no longer has to play games, has to win, that he can do these things easily. The harder he drives that must postulate, the closer and closer he edges towards the can't. The greater the compulsion to succeed, the more difficult success becomes. Only when the playing of games are light and airy things, when competence is a joy like poetry, and the need to win is a far junior consideration to the enjoyment of the game, does true ability even begin to emerge. And as he approaches this state, he more and more realizes that his own happiness is bound up with the happiness of others, for he cannot easily play games whilst alone. He needs others to share the sensations, others as capable as himself, or his games will soon become unbearably dull. To always win is no fun, and so he learns to cherish a good opponent and becomes very concerned about his welfare. Thus, as the being frees up from the trap, his view of life changes, becomes broader and less parochial. He lives his life more and more from the viewpoint of the maximum amount of benefit for the maximum number of beings. For only in this way is his life truly rich. In short, he has become an ethical being. A man from Nazareth some 2,000 years ago who said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," possessed more than a glimmering of the true factors involved. The route out is from the compulsive playing of games, through the voluntary playing of games, to the state of nirvana, eternal bliss and oneness with all life. As the being walks this route, he soon perceives that there is a basic code of ethics that governs conduct, and that when he violates this code he suffers just as much as his victim. 1. Never force a person to know a thing against their choice. 2. Never prevent a person from knowing. 3. Never force a person to make a thing known. 4. Never prevent a person from making a thing known. This code is as easy to live by, as the being is no longer in a compulsive games condition. Evaluate yourself against it, for it will give you many insights into the nature of your current compulsive games conditions. When a being is free from the compulsive playing of games, he quite naturally lives by this code. He would no more dream of violating it than he would of cutting his own throat, for he knows all too well the consequences. It's entirely safe then to free a being, for what being could be considered dangerous who lives by such a code? Finale. I offer you a route out. There may well be other routes out. If there are, I know not of them, after many lifetimes of searching. The fortuitous combination of games matrix and circumstances that permitted me to discover this route at this time may not ever happen to me again, and others too could easily overlook it. So don't lose this data, for it may be many lifetimes before you come across it again, if you ever do. The data is quite free. I only ask 2 things. 1. You use the data. 2. When you duplicate the data, you duplicate it exactly. Not because I am enamored with my prose style, but because it could very easily become just another trap, in a universe already abundantly endowed with them.